Good morning, campers. Welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. As you can see, we've gotten busy spending all that science and money we just earned, unlocking a few new parts, the liquid fuel boosters, a couple of electronics parts, the asteroid claw, and we're going to go ahead and tag a couple asteroids. They're still significant time periods out, but once they enter Kerbin's sphere of influence, we might get an asteroid mission up there, and in the meantime, we might need the claw to rescue someone, potentially in the future. Good thing to have around, I realize, so we're going to grab that now. Checking on our transfer windows to other planets. Nothing great coming up yet. Duna's not too terribly far out, but we're also going to check and see what kind of active contracts we have. Some very promising Minmus stuff. So the big payoff for Minmus is getting a space station up there. So that's what we're designing now, is a rocket to launch a both an orbiter and a space station. Same orbiter we used on our moon mission, except that it's got landing legs now because that orbiter alone has more than enough delta V to land on Minmus and get back up into orbit. Also, it means I can bring it back down onto Kerbin and land it securely. Just changing out some of the science bays as well. And here's where things start to go poorly, is I'm adding a space station module where the lander was, except I forget one thing. The space station module is significantly heavier than the lander. So what I really should have also done was add yet another stage to this rocket in addition to that. But, hindsight being 2020 and all. Also throwing on some universal storage parts here. Some snack storage, some power generation, backup supplies of hydrogen and oxygen, empty water tank, more snacks, and lots of monopropellant, because when you're docking with a space station, if it can top up your monopropellant stores, that's always a nice thing to have. Now, the only goal for this launch is to get this station into orbit and maybe push it out to Minmus, but I really just want to have it up there. If we happen to have enough delta V to then take it onward to Minmus, then I'd be pretty happy. But we might have to launch a second flight for the to boost it out there. I'm going to try out the new liquid fuel boosters. And they're considerably stronger than the 3-tank stack we were using with a skipper before. So we'll actually be able... So the initial plan... They're also considerably more expensive, so our initial plan here is going to be 2 liquid fuel boosters and 2 solid rocket boosters. Then we're going to be using the mid-size solid rocket booster rather than the extremely large one, which we have unlocked. Though I think probably the better idea would have been to go with 4 asparagus stage liquid fuel boosters, but I don't think I had the money for that, because I spent it all on unlocking things. And that looks a little silly, so we're going to swap those back out to the regular size SRBs. Set the thrust to about 70. You want them helping, but you don't want them helping too much, or else you'll waste a lot of their delta V in the lower atmosphere. And anyone doing the delta V calculations on this probably knows what's coming, is this is not quite enough rocket. It looks good, but unless that space station was full of fuel, then this isn't going to go well. So we're going to roll it out to the launch pad here after we finish up fixing the staging, and then we're going to immediately roll it back because, as you can see, I haven't strutted everything up quite right yet. Set some custom action groups for the launch abort system, which we've added after the incidents we've had previously. And there's another mistake, filling up the space station module with crew, even though we haven't even gotten it into space yet. Should always launch these things empty. That's generally a good idea. Launch them empty, send the crew up later. Take some pages from real-world NASA and Russian Space Agency proceedings. Strutted it up after we rolled out to the launch pad and back in. And looks pretty majestic on the launch pad, I do have to say that. It's a good-looking rocket. I mean, it's could use some fairings to cover up some of the more exposed bits, but you know. There we are, going into launch. Fast forwarding just a little bit here because, you know, you've seen this stuff before. Almost through the solid fuel boosters already. Doing a bit of a roll there. We want to go heads down and we want those solid rocket boosters to fly off sideways. And we also don't want to risk the, when we drop the liquid fuel boosters later, we want those to go out to either side of the rocket rather than up or down, which we've already dropped those, which is bad because we are not very high up yet. We've got our gravity turn already about 20,000, but we are losing a lot of speed because we've got that skipper engine there instead of a mainsail. Going more sideways than up now, which is very bad. Went ahead and jettisoned the launch escape system. Really struggling for altitude now. Starting to realize what's going on here. And we're going to go ahead and just make this all about getting into orbit. Dump all of the fuel from the service module into the booster stage. Try and eke out a little more delta V out of there. On-the-fly fuel transfer is never a good sign. You can see our center of mass changing slightly there as the camera shifts. Getting some good altitude now. We are going to reach space. We're just not going to stay there, I don't think. Would not take much to get this rocket actually into orbit, so we might revisit this design later. Maybe. Our apoapsis in space now. Setting up, we're going to cut our engine and set up a maneuver node here, trying to get to orbit. Still got a, maybe about a quarter of the booster's worth of fuel left, which, if you think about how much we've added to it, is, oh, like a fifth of the can, I think, total. It's not good. It's definitely not good. Adding our maneuver node to our apoapsis to get into orbit, seeing how much delta V we'll need. Over 1,000, 1,200 delta V needed to reach orbit from that suborbital trajectory. So, definitely not going to happen. But we're going to try anyway because we don't really have the, we certainly don't have the delta V to slow down and safely land again. This rocket is so heavy, if we fired the parachutes, that might be an idea for future missions. Put parachutes on the booster stage just in case we have to ditch and go back down. I think any crewed module ought to have parachutes on it. It's probably just as a safety thing for future missions, I think. Yeah, I kind of wish I'd thought of that. Adding some RCS thrusters here, trying to eke out some extra delta V. Got it down to 800 and plummeted back into the atmosphere. So just cutting forward so you don't need to see everything that went wrong. There were some EVA Kerbals that did not last. Oof. Everything exploding. Very sad day. Just tripled the number of dead Kerbals in the save file with that one flight, unfortunately. But, anyway, at least the command pod made it back down safely. So we are going to go ahead and reset here. You can see our updated KIA list. Very, very sad to see that. We've lost Adzon, Lankus, Jenner, and Sidney Kerman, in addition to Jebediah and Bill. I'm so ashamed. But their memory will live on. We will add them to our memorial walkway of flags between the VAB and the launch pad. You can see here the crew of the command pod plus one of the other Kerbals. I forget which one the extra was. Setting up the memorials here. It's the most Kerbals I've had to do for this. It makes me very, very sad. I'm getting a shot for the history books. and revisiting this design now. So we do still need to go to Minmus. We're not going to take the space station this time. We just need to get out to Minmus, conduct the surveys, and get back just to get a bunch of money so we can maybe try and launch the station again. So we're just going to ditch the lander stage entirely. This launch system has more than enough Delta V to get the ship out to Minmus and back and land. Remembering to switch out that decoupler that doesn't work. Probably ought to just go in and delete that from the parts menu, but I kind of like the idea of having a decoupler that's so safe that it just doesn't work. Seems like something the Kerbals would invent. Setting up our abort system again, as well as action groups for deploying parachutes and separating from the service module that I can hit without looking on my number pad. The large 0 key and the 5 key with the bump on it, very good action group numbers for that. Which I guess I don't know if I mentioned that before. I have my action groups re-key bound to the number pad, just because I find I can activate those without looking a lot easier than the top row of numbers on the keyboard. I don't know what that sound was. I think that was just something that the game picked up while I was recording. So sorry about that. Anyway, you can see us getting into orbit here. Skipped most of the launch, but I do love this moment. I knew it was coming, so I'm looking back at it. Boom! The new explosions are just so beautiful. 0.25, best new addition, bigger explosions. Always good to see those without losing any Kerbals. Pulling into orbit now. We're going to set up our Minmus injection maneuver here. Pretty easy one. Again, we're going to rendezvous with Minmus while it's still pretty well paced to hit it when it's I think the descending node. So if you want to time your launches to hit those right, you want to wait until until Minmus is at just about the highest inclination it can possibly get before you launch your vessel, and then you'll usually be able to get an encounter at one of the ascending or descending nodes. Pulling into orbit around Minmus now. Nice hard cut there, so y'all don't have to watch me fast forwarding through an orbital rendezvous you've seen me do at least 3 times already, I think. Now we're going to make this a nice eccentric orbit because we have a lot of science to do in high orbit as well as low orbit. We have to do a mystery goo, a magnetometer scan, and a science junior scan. But luckily we do have all those available as universal storage parts, so they're stowed in the service module here between the 2 fuel tanks. Though I realized somewhat late there that I stuffed the magnetometer in right underneath one of the landing gear, so we are going to have to open the landing gear, extend the legs before we can bring out the magnetometer. There we go. Mary Poppins magnetometer. And that transmits for 100% value, so we're going to go ahead and send that back down. We do have a fuel cell on board this vehicle, so we got plenty of power for transmitting stuff, which is what I realize now is absolutely the best thing about that fuel cell, is it generates power quickly enough that you can transmit science without having to worry about killing your batteries and splitting up the transmission. And that gave us a science data around Minmus contract completed, as well as part of our orbital survey contract. So we need a mystery goo observation and a material study observation. Doing a little bit more science, stowing the legs. Alright, coming in for our landing. Now, something that happened between cuts there is I did those 2 other science experiments in orbit and transmitted them back, and then realized I'd already done both of those, so I got no science for transmitting them. Which means we're going to have to send another ship up here eventually anyway to complete that particular objective, because you have to get some science in order to count as completing the orbital survey. So we will need to send another mystery goo and another science junior up here at some point. But in the meantime, we have some flag planting to do. Coming in for a nice landing. Yeah. Minmus does not look very good after I rejiggered my graphic settings. Might have to look into that. I think it was just the terrain shader that was messing with me, so I can probably turn up the terrain resolution and get some of that lovely Minmus ice back without looking quite so, frankly, terrible. It looks a lot better once we get lower, but from this altitude, it's a low-resolution mess. That is for sure. Coming in over Minmus's flats. This is not the greater flats. This is not the lesser flats. This is not the great flats. It's the flats. Just the flats. I thought I sped this landing up, but apparently we're going to do this at real time. I very much love landing on Minmus because you can... It's not as difficult as landing on the moon. It seems it's farther away, so first-time players, you're going to want to go for the moon first, but Minmus is a much better target. It's easier to get into orbit. I mean, as long as you time your launch right so you can hit it at one of the ascending or descending nodes, it's just as easy to get to as the moon. It only takes like 50 more meters per second to get out there. But you arrive in orbit with just as much fuel as you would have had arriving in orbit around the moon. But it's so much smaller, it has significantly less gravity. It doesn't take as much delta V to do anything here. And you're going to see that we're landing with our service module that we took to the moon. It took all of the fuel in this service module just to enter orbit, trim up our orbit, and get home on our moon mission. And we're going to land with almost 3/4 a tank of fuel left on Minmus. So that's a huge difference in the difficulty curve. I really wish they'd reflected that in the contract system. I wish the Minmus contracts came up before the moon contracts, but a lot of people still go to the moon first. And that's a dream crusher, that one is. You're much better off going to Minmus first. It's a lot easier to land. These you can aim for these nice big blue ice sheets that are perfectly flat, easy to land on, and they're at 0 meters altitude. So you don't have to worry about looking at your altimeter and then crashing into a mountain when you're still supposedly at 5,000 meters. Very, very good target for your first off Kerbal landing. Though, of course, it's got no atmosphere, so your parachutes are still useless. So, I mean, if you really just want to get something somewhere without having to worry about landing manually, you want to send it to somewhere with an atmosphere where your parachutes can do all the work for you. Eve, in particular, is very good for that. You can just pop your parachutes and coast down without any engine whatsoever, as long as you got landing legs. As long as you have enough parachutes, you'll slow down plenty. Duna's a little hard. Its atmosphere is very, very thin, so you can deploy a normal amount of parachutes and still smash into the ground going way too fast. But again, Minmus, best place to do your first powered landing on another body. Here we are, got our shadow coming into view now, descending on our Poodle engine. I do love the Poodle. It's nice and efficient, and it's low profile. Here we are, setting down nicely now. Still going a little bit fast, about 5 meters per second. I feel like I'm landing a little bit too hard in most of these, but bringing down our speed nicely here is going to be a pretty textbook landing. Still a little lateral velocity, but nothing major. And we set down nice and gentle on Minmus's flats. You see the textures doing a little weird thing there. So doing a bit of science now that we're on the surface. Bring out our Mary Poppins magnetometer again. Got our fuel cell running, as you can see. Did that between cuts earlier. Using our mystery goo in our materials bay now that we're down on the surface. We did bring extras, but we needed those for the surface science here. Do have an extra fuel cell, just not sure why. I think that was just for symmetry's sake. Run through our typical science grab here. Transmitting some of it back home already. Trying to make sure I get in the habit of transmitting science that can give you the full value back instead of dragging it all the way back, just in case I crash on return. But that doesn't happen too terribly often. Hudbald out in the ladder doing an EVA report. He's going to climb back in. He is not the Kerbal that gets to go on the surface mission this time. Instead, we are going to use the wonderfully named Lodaus. Lodus. Lodus. Lodaus. His name is so much fun to say, so I'm going to use him. No magnetic field on Minmus. That is an interesting observation. That means it doesn't have a solid metal core. Right. Lodaus on EVA begins to descend the ladder, and uh-oh, he's ragdolling. He's ragdolling. Ah! Oh. Good pirouette. Good pirouette. I think he's okay. I think he's uh-oh. Bad things have happened. Lodaus appears to have landed on his backpack, and all of our telemetry vanished from the mission. In fact, the switch back to the crew pod, and according to the crew pod, it is spinning wildly and is not reading anything on any of its instruments. So something horrible seems to have happened. So we're going to send. We're not getting any more telemetry from them. We're going to send up a Lumon Kerman to investigate what happened there. Just all of a sudden, absolutely everything went bonkers. It was actually the whole game crashed on me a couple of seconds later. But it kept recording for a few moments. You got to see the unusual returns I was getting. Anyway, you see Lumon in one of our older designs, just in case it was the ship that did that, is landing in almost the same spot on Minmus. As you can see, there is no sign whatsoever of the other ship. It has just completely disappeared. Speeding through our descent here. So I want to go on record as saying that one was definitely not my fault. There was nothing edited out of that particular incident there. He just fell off the ladder, did a backflip, and the world ended. So very, very unfortunate circumstances. Touching down here. Lumon's going to do some science observations, see if they can track down what happened to the other crew. And time for him to go investigate the other landing site. Not going to risk him ragdolling, we're just going to go on the RCS pack straight off the ladder. Set down gently on the surface, and time for a little bit of a hike. He's going to go all the way over to where the other vessel landed and do a quick surface survey, and if it turns out that nothing can be found, we're going to leave behind a little memorial for the crew. And rename this boring little area of Minmus's Flats in honor of the missing Kerbonauts that landed here. Very, very, very careful that as I'm landing, I do not want a repeat of whatever that was. So being very careful not to ragdoll the Kerbal here, just in case. Getting some samples of the area to bring back to Kerbin, just in case we can determine what went wrong here. Scientists back in Kerbin very, very anxious to see what maybe there was some sort of tectonic activity that consumed the vehicle. We're going to name this site Lodaus's Legacy. It's the site of the disappearance of the Minmus again Mark I and the crew. Their whereabouts remain unknown. However, their life support will have long since run out by the time Lumon returns to Kerbin. Very curious thing indeed, actually. I went back and looked at the crew manifest before I launched this mission, and Bob and Hudbald were marked as killed in action, while Lodaus was simply missing in action. Though once Lumon returned back to Kerbin, Lodaus had been changed over to KIA in the crew manifest. So Lumon, making his descent back onto Kerbin, came in over a nice little hilly region in the southern hemisphere. And touchdown. Uh-oh, no, not 10 Kerbals in one episode. Close. Or I guess that would be the 8th Kerbal in this episode. But continuing our tradition of erecting increasingly erratic memorial plaques for each of our lost Kerbals. We've got Bob, Hudbald, and Ladaus now joining the list of the lost. And again, another shot for the history books. We have gone from a total of 2 Kerbals lost to a total of 9 Kerbals lost over the course of a single episode. So very, very sad sequence of events for the denizens of Kerbin. But they will carry on. They will continue to fire rockets into space. And they will probably continue to blow up said rockets. Anyway, moving on to our strategies here. We're earning quite more science than we are money. So we're going through the tech tree faster than we can actually pay to unlock those parts, especially as those parts get much more expensive as they get higher tech. But so we're going to switch around our strategies here. We're going to cancel the outsourced R&D program and start up our patent licensing, try and earn a little bit extra money. I probably ought to switch the fundraising to a bit higher, but we're going to skip that for now. Hopefully that'll let us get some of those fancy parts we've already unlocked actually unlocked sooner and get some probe missions going. Hope to get some more. Well, we need to explore considerably more of the moon and Minmus in future missions, and really want to get the space station up and running. Like, I've got all those parts. I don't want to wait until we've unlocked everything before we start trying those. So maybe we'll see. Hopefully get one of those up and running pretty soon, next few episodes. In the meantime, I will see you all in episode 7. Thank you so much for watching.